Hello there, and welcome to the webinar today. I hope everyone is having a great day, and I'm looking forward to sharing this content with you. My name is Ian Goodridge, and I'm Head of Product Marketing at Spire Global. And I'm joined today by Claude Brosseau from Northern Sky Research. And we both thank you for taking the time out of your day to review this content. As everybody gets settled in with the GoToWebinar, I wanted to mention a quick few points. First up, everyone's welcome to use the question and answer panel that's in the GoToWebinar panel. We will be answering those as we go along, and we have time at the end for Q&A as well, but we guarantee to respond to those questions. And everyone has been muted, so please, no one needs to worry about background noise during the presentation. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the agenda today. We're going to start out, both Claude and I will do introductions on our companies, and Claude is up first with running through his section. Then I'll be back for my section on AIS Data Ecosystem, and we will be doing 2 or 3 live demos depending on how we're doing on time. So hopefully everyone is going to look forward to those. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone is interacting with GoToWebinar. Everyone's online. We're going to send over a quick poll, and we're going to ask a question that's actually going to help us kind of fine-tune some of the content through the webinar here. So I'm going to go ahead and send this poll to you. It's going to take over your screen for just a second, and then we'll take a quick look at the results when you get back. So if everyone wouldn't mind responding to the poll, and give it a few seconds for everyone to click on some buttons here. All right, results are coming in. Thank you. Okay, 5 more seconds. We're at 98% voted. Are we going to get to 100? 2% of you? No. Okay, no problem. We're going to close it right there. So excellent. It's a even split between the 3 main topics, which is excellent news. So it's kind of a 33% split between people that want to hear about Smallsat, 33% people that want to hear about Spire Global, and then 33% of people that want to talk about AIS data. So Claude, that's a good way to start the webinar. I'm going to send it over to you and make you the presenter. Hopefully you're ready to go for us.
Hi, Ian. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Very happy to be able to share today some of the results that we have in our research on Smallsats. I believe that this slide here is showing you what our, sorry, let me just, allow me to just change settings a bit. Okay. What we're going to talk about today is a new paradigm in space technology. The new paradigm in space technology is something that's taken hold over the past few years. And one of the key reasons for that is definitely the advent of small sats and constellations of small satellites. Associated with that, of course, is launching those small satellites and what that means to the overall market and the various applications. And we will be discussing that during the intervention today. NSR is a industry-leading market research and consulting firm. We are located around the world. We serve customers also around the world across the whole value chain, from operators to service providers and end users. And interestingly enough, the end users' demands and requirements is something that we've seen more and more over the past few years as there's more users of a satellite through various applications. The content for today's conversation with you is based on 2 NSR reports. One is called Small Satellite Markets, 4th edition, and that addresses the market for satellites between 100 kilos and 500 kilos. 500 kilos is roughly 1,100 pounds. And then the other study is called Satellite Manufacturing and Launch Services, 8th edition, which was recently released. And this one discusses any satellite manufactured or launched over 100 kilos. Or roughly 220 pounds. So the new paradigm in space technology, it really starts from new strategies that were implemented to basically reduce risk, optimize capital expenditures, or as we call it, CapEx, boost capabilities, and offer greater competitiveness across the industry. You see there about 12 or 13 various new strategies or drivers for this new paradigm that are being implemented at various levels across the satellite industry and the space industry. Condosat partnerships, in-orbit servicing, electrical propulsions, small satellites, and many others mentioned here are driving this. What's of interest to us, especially today, is how, in particular, small satellites are impacting manufacture in the sense that there's more bulk manufacturing being implemented. There's a lot of use of commercial off-the-shelf component actually to enable this. A lot of the companies such as Spire are using in-house designs and manufacturing to produce their satellites. There are also more payloads being put on those satellites as there are more applications that are being delivered as well. And all of this, of course, is driven in large part by higher revisit rate for both imaging, for both sensing, and also even telecommunications to enable better networking. If we look on this slide on the trends in the past 4 years, we're seeing that the most recent figures, estimates that we have gathered is roughly $4.4 billion that's been invested in small satellite-based companies in the last 5 years. Now, there seems to be a plateau that was reached in 2017, if you look on the upper right, in terms of the numbers of companies funded and the funding, but at the same time, the number of small sat companies reached over 200. So that keeps growing. As we can see here on the lower right, communications is the main market for small sats, in particular because of very large constellations of high throughput satellites that are expected to launch in the next 10 years, but Earth observation and launch are not far behind. Just for your information, we categorized Spire here in Earth observation, but their activities span across communications and SA, which is situational awareness. In particular, what's also interesting to note is that for Earth observation, which we hear a lot more than ever before, it's the second highest in terms of investment, and it's far more diverse with about 35 funded startups since 2013. In terms of launch, for launching all these satellites, we see that there's a very high growth of about 350% in 2026. And that's driven in large part, again, by communication satellites. But the interesting fact here in this chart is that there's a continued replenishment across all the other segments. And if we look just at Earth observation, this will hover around 150 satellites from 2020 onwards. If we look at the red line, the dark red line, which is situational awareness, that also grows to about 50 launches per year. If you look at the distribution on the left-hand side, it is quite diverse, and the communications segment, of course, is driving a lot of this, but EO has a larger and more varied set of players that will be launching those satellites. And we count approximately 5,000 of them in the 1 to 500 kilo range to be launched in the 2017 to 2026 period. Now, if we look at the forecast by applications, and what we mean by application here is what we saw in the previous slide: technology development, Earth observation, science, situational awareness, communications, and then others, which is a very small part. Communications does take the lion's share, especially starting around 2019. And after that, though, we see that there's also a lot of Earth observation satellites being launched. If we look at the graph on the left-hand side, what's interesting to note is the launch and manufacturing market by application have different evolution paths. For technology development, for launching, it's a single-digit compound annual growth rate. For Earth observation, in terms of launch rate, it's higher, but in terms of market value, it's lower, in large part because of lower cost per satellite. And then lower cost per launch as well. For science, it's also single digits. For situational awareness, it's a very high 18% compound annual growth rate for launch. And for market value, it's 47%. So that means there's going to be more of those situational awareness satellites being launched. For communications, it's also very high. And for the other markets, it's also quite high. What's interesting is that overall, the launch rate grows in double digits, and then the value of the contracts also is quite high, but still in the single digits. If we look on the right-hand side, that's basically what I've been discussing here. There's about 650 satellites that will launch in the peak year, and that will generate around $3 billion. And going forward, we expect the market for small satellites to generate at least $2.3 billion a year after approximately 2020. By operator type, operators are the ones that own those satellites and operate them. There are more commercial operators than ever before. And clearly this is the impact of what we call the new space, and that's demonstrated here as these operators are the primary drivers because in large part of the investments that we've noted earlier in the webinar, and that will facilitate market growth for launching small sat. There is still a lot of military out there that will provide some good level of activities. UPOs, which is university programs, those are mostly the educational ones. The activity there is expected to increase, but the budget and the launch opportunities are also restraining factors. For government, in particular for space and science, we see that there's established program and processes for pursuing small sat opportunities. And that's also in combination with budget constraints as we see. And there's definitely, though, a very clear trend as we see in this graph here in the lower left of commercially operated small satellites that will launch in the next decade. If we look at the various scenarios, and that's to basically establish what could happen if certain things happen, if certain assumptions are put into the mix of the model, it depends largely on constellations making it or not. So in reality, more of them launching on time or sooner drive the high growth scenario, and then fewer of them and fewer dedicated small sat launchers will drive down the forecast. We haven't talked about the dedicated small sat launchers yet, but we will talk about those later on. And these are basically to help unlock this market so that there's more opportunities for small sat operators to launch their payloads. We will now go and take a poll. I believe, Ian, we have a question for our audience.
Yep, thanks for that. I'm going to go ahead and send another poll. So the screen is going to get taken over real quick by this poll. And this is a single response. So just pick the one that you believe is accurate. And just a reminder, 500 kilograms is about 1,100 pounds, as Claude mentioned earlier. Okay, results are coming in. We'll give it a few more seconds. 60% of you have voted, good job. 70%, all right. All right. Okay, we're gonna close that one out. Results are strongly leaning to 70%. 45% of people pick 70%, Claude, but the second next highest being 50% or 30%.
Okay, great. These are great results. So that leads us to the advent of small sat constellations. The future of small sat markets and the drivers of growth lies firmly with constellation systems. I'll say that our audience and NSR are quite in sync because it is 70% that we expect will launch as part of constellation in the 2017 to 2026 period. A lot of this is enabled by the very robust investment environment, which is clearly taken hold in probably more in North America and now a bit more in Europe, but also in various regions around the world. It is starting to happen. Declining manufacturing costs because of bulk manufacturing and system designs and redesign on the fly also as happens on some of the constellations we've seen launch so far. Increasing launch availability, and that's tied to the dedicated small sat launchers that I've mentioned earlier on. Of course, expansion of big data markets. Why big data? Because a lot of the data that comes from satellites from various sensors on satellite, be it optical, or radar or other new ones that are being launched, enable, I guess, an expansion of the use of the flood of data that is coming down from those satellites. Not just the ones that are launching today, but even the ones that launched earlier on, as there's more access now to cheaper archive data, which enable better analysis and greater demand for analytics. And then, of course, connectivity demand, and that ties in quite closely to the constellations that are coming up that will be providing high throughput capacity. If we look at the main players in the competitive landscape, we could categorize the market today in three stages. The first one is stage A competition, the second one is stage B competition, and then the third one is market and an actual competition. So the first one, the stage A, is featured by high competition for funding across and within verticals to present a very high return on investment and low risk projects to potential investors. And you see that there's funding barriers before it goes on to stage B. In stage B, what we are seeing is completed, of course, stage A competition, and now looking to book launch across verticals. High competition again with players in verticals and across other verticals to swiftly develop constellations for early market entrance. Then there's another constraint there, which is the launch constraint. So that means once these players get to the market and competitive landscape, it is competing for greater market share with existing and also upcoming players, but securing not just launch slots, but also additional customers. And on the right-hand side, the numbers that you see there is very few compared to what is stage A and stage B. So that means we're asking ourselves the questions, how many will break the barriers and enter the market? On the right-hand side, how many will generate sufficient business to launch the full constellations and then progress to replenishment? So the work, let's put it this way, is not done once you're in the market. Once you're on the right-hand side of that graph, you're just starting. And actually, there's a lot of hurdles that you need to overcome before you get to the market. But once you're there, the challenge is different. Does that mean that once the market gets underway, there's saturation and there's competition? We're tracking right now more than 75 smallsat constellations in development. These are ranging from Earth observation imagery, AIS, M2M, which is machine to machine, Internet of Things, IoT, and then wideband communications, space, weather, and entertainment. So we think there's about 20% of them that are highly likely to succeed through the initial deployment. The initial deployment means sending satellites into orbit. There is definitely a first mover advantage, and that will be critical as it opens up a market and it secures also customers. Many markets that small satellites are pursuing, however, are becoming rapidly commoditized. Just to give you an example, the low and medium resolution optical imagery market, we believe, will decline at approximately a 7.5% compound annual growth rate by 2026. So there are key challenges there noted on this slide in terms of funding, launch access, customer acquisition and distribution channels, which is not to be underestimated, and then the unique product that you bring to the market and or succeeding in a commoditized market via either volume sales or other differentiating factor. And all in all, startup failures and consolidation via mergers and acquisition is anticipated in the smallsat market over the next 10 years. Let's talk about launching those small satellites, because that is no small part of the business case. If we just look at the challenges and initiatives in the launch environment, small sat operators continue to struggle to find a good launch opportunity, not just a launch opportunity, but a good one with the right schedule, the orbit, the access, of course, the clearing, and then the cost. The situation, though, is improving because there's going to be more launch service providers that will engage in this market, and some operators report no difficulty in securing launch slots as needed. So that is good news. However, challenges abound. Launch failures, inclinations that remain difficult to secure. Sun synchronous, as many of you probably know, is the standard offering for smallsat. There's regulations and policy and national practices also that make having some vehicles or launches difficult to access. In terms of initiative, what's positive is that there are systems there to optimize altitude and inclination from rideshare. That means having a share along with another principal payload on a launcher that often deploys SmallSat in suboptimal orbits. Dedicated rideshare missions on larger rockets is another good initiative. The use of dedicated SmallSat launchers, such as Rocket Lab, which recently signed a three-launch contract with Spaceflight Industries. And then, of course, the standardized envelope for larger mass classes, especially in the 50-kilogram range and the 150-kilogram range, similar to the CubeSat standard for nanosats. So all is not doom and gloom, but there are definitely a lot of evolution in this market. In particular, if we look at the launch landscape, there are many of them that are in the preliminary stage. Again, a bit like the small sat operators, they face funding barriers. Those that are in the intermediate stage face oftentimes design challenges. And once they get into the final stages, it's technical challenges and, of course, maintaining timelines to get the operational stages, where we see there's already quite a few of them that are available. So the slow progress from one stage to the other, the delays in launch site development, the regulatory approvals and testing of the rockets themselves all make it for a very, very long and arduous road to operations. How many will overcome these barriers to enter the market is always a question, but at least there are many of them that are right now trying to unlock this bottleneck that we've been seeing with regards to launching small sats in particular. So what's the bottom line of our analysis on small satellites? Well, it's fairly positive if you look in terms of funding, 4.4 billion invested over the last 5 years, and it keeps growing, is very positive. Over 5,000 satellites we expect will launch in the 100 to 500 kilo category in the next 10 years. Communications is the big driver here, but then Earth observation and other applications such as situational awareness include a more varied set of players. About 70% of SmallSat, as you have noted, are expected to launch as part of the constellations in the next 10 years. So those are groups of satellites that are pretty much on the same design or the same basis that will launch together, and therefore may facilitate also finding launch access and or replenishment. SmallSat, of course, will deliver a very diverse set of new and very innovative services, we believe. On the minus side, launch is still a constraint to deployment. Many markets that SmallSat are pursuing are rapidly becoming commoditized. And then the question is always, how many satellite operators will generate sufficient business to eventually launch, but also replenish and make money out of the constellations that they're launching? So Ian, I believe we're ready to hear about Spire right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claude. There was a question that came in on one of the slides, but I think we're circled back on that the Q&A time. So just everyone else feel free. Yeah, everyone else feel free to send more questions over on the Q&A panel. Okay, so I'm going to take back over the screen. And I'm going to run through the Spire introduction. And thank you, Claude, for giving that really good overview of the SmallSat future. It's pretty exciting stuff. So a few of you out there may be asking a little bit about who is Spire, and I think at our core we're obviously a data and predictive analytics firm. But what's really interesting is actually how we collect that data. It's not that we're generating it from other sources or kind of just repurposing other people's data. We actually, as Claude mentioned, have our own constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. This little graphic on the screen right now is just kind of showing, there are orbits. There's 57 of them currently in orbit. There's 4 more attached to the space station right now, and there's two actually sat in New Zealand with the Rocket Lab launch. So kind of tying into exactly what Claude was saying about launch capacity and pipeline. That's a really good example. And when we talk a little bit about Spire, people often say, okay, what makes you different in the marketplace? And there was a really good slide in Claude's presentation there that showed, you know, we're through kind of like the concept of actually a fully operational, you know, satellite data firm. And besides launch, everything else is our product and our value chain. So our design and our manufacture of satellites are ours. And then on the most important side, the operations and the data delivery side of it, that is all in-house and all Spire owned. So taking a little bit of a detour here and talking about AIS data, thank you for everybody who, when you registered, you answered the question, you know, how familiar were you with AIS data? That was extremely helpful. And about 50 of you out there said that you weren't that familiar with it. So that was enough for us to actually want to kind of give a little bit of an overview of AIS data for everybody. So 4 key bullets about AIS data on your screen right here for everyone to consume. And you know, it's important to note that it is very well used around the world. It was originally developed as a, you know, an awareness system, a collision avoidance system, and there is a massive volume of these messages being sent out. And more on that in just a second. But there's 2 types of AIS data, and I think as you get more familiar with it, you'll hear you know, more about terrestrial and satellite AIS data. Usually, kind of use the S and the T there. And I'm not going to dig, you know, go deep into the different types of messages and the different kind of you know, kind of power of the messages, and, you know, are they class A or class B? That's a really good subject, and, you know, if you are interested, you know, we can follow up with that information, or you can go kind of hunt it down yourself. But we're going to kind of focus today on, you know, why satellite AIS and why was it actually even necessary? And this picture here on the screen paints a pretty good illustration of that. You've got your kind of terrestrial, you know, satellite, terrestrial AIS receiver here, and it is limited by either curvature of the Earth or just purely range capacity to about, you know, normally about 50 nautical miles. And what was discovered quite a few years ago is that actually in low Earth orbit, you can very successfully collect these AIS messages, even though their transponders are really designed to send the messages kind of horizontally. Actually works extremely well vertically as well. The only challenge that brought was purely the volume. So when a satellite looks at, you know, its horizon, it really is literally, you know, a massive footprint. And that's a lot of messages, which we'll touch on in just a second. And that requires a lot of investment to make sure that the technology on board the satellites can handle the volume of the messages. So to give you an idea of what that looks like visually, this slide is a kind of like a density report, like a heat map almost, of points of messages, so latitude and longitude collection points of messages across the globe over a 48-hour period, just kind of picked at random. And you can see the intensity of some of the messages coming out of that. But what is interesting is the complete global coverage of an open ocean. I mean, there literally is not a single spot where there isn't coverage. And one area to, you know, to kind of highlight that's becoming, you know, kind of interesting in the industry is this kind of the, you know, northern latitudes. There's a lot of interest in kind of Arctic ice routes that are opening up, and the challenges that go with that for environmental awareness and things like that, especially with, you know, large, you know, kind of crude oil moving around up there, and there's no provision for spill control and things like that because those routes are new. And that's one of the areas where our data is really starting to shine, is, you know, covering the northern latitudes. So quick little summary of what is an AIS data message, because you keep hearing me talk about messages and different types of AIS data. And there's a lot of interesting information coming out of the AIS message, but the ones that, you know, we kind of worry about a little bit today will be kind of, you know, the unique identifiers, the IMO or the MMSI, and position information, longitude and latitude from onboard GPS, and speed and things like draft as well. But again, there is an awful lot of data coming from, you know, from the vessels. To give you an idea, with the vessels moving, it's about a 2 to 10 second message send. So every 2 to 10 seconds, there's a new message being sent out. And then if it's not moving, it's about 3 minutes. So you can, again, think about the satellites and the amount of volume that is. Okay, so I am going to send this over to live demo now. And we're going to take a quick look at kind of like what the AIS data looks like. So bear with me just a second as I transfer this over to a demonstration screen. So on the screen right now, you should be seeing kind of a world picture of a world view. And this is a visualization tool, and you know, at Spire we stop at the kind of the API level, so we deliver the data in a very cleansed and very easy to use way. And we have a lot of partners and a lot of integrations with visualization tools and things like that. And this is just a really good way of getting to kind of interact with the data. So with this view right now, I literally can just turn on a call to the API, and I could say to the API, okay, show me all cargo ships that we've received a message recently from, and color them by speed. And as you can see, the system comes back with indicators of where everything is. And then as you kind of go a little deeper into that, we can see the metadata that's coming out of it. So if I click onto this cargo ship here, it's heading. We actually can collect through our other data sources and obviously all the pre-processing we do. We can kind of figure out where it's heading, its previous track. You can see that in the purple there, just behind this box here. And a little bit more information about it, its classification, flag, class of the message, length and width, and things like that. But the reason what's interesting about this one, and talking about the data that's coming up on the screen here, is part of this presentation is going to be talking a little bit about the fusion of other data sets. This is purely AIS data with a little bit more vessel data on there. But what I'm going to kind of zip over to now is talking a little bit more about the value add that comes from adding additional data to the AIS data to make it more open up more use cases and that kind of thing. So, okay, so hold that thought for a second there. We're going to zip back over to the presentation slides. All right. Okay, thanks. All right. So when we think about the next generation AIS data ecosystem, this isn't actually focusing on the data itself. I think we'll get to a standard, where everyone's very familiar with the quality of the data. Are there new regulations coming that may impact that? Something along the lines of like aircraft, ADS-B tracking, things like that for vessels. Of course, there's always those conversations going on. But when we talk about data ecosystems and the future of that, we're really talking about how can we fuse other data sets to make it, to improve use cases and make everything more valuable. So for us, the next gen AIS data ecosystem is improving the quality of the AIS. So how do we do more pre-processing on board the satellites, and then doing more high traffic zone mediation, so improving the accuracy in high traffic zones. Obviously, when we talk about terrestrial AIS, one of the benefits of collecting it with the ground station is that the volume can be so much higher. And again, satellites have to deal with millions of messages with their footprints. But we're able to do a lot more onboard work to really help with, cleaning up that signal and helping those high traffic zones. So, that's an area that we're focusing on for the next gen AIS system. Data delivery, working kind of as an API first company, it makes a lot of sense. Not developing, end products just to solve one or two uses is definitely the way to go with these kind of data sets. And the reason for that is, we're going to kind of talk about that as we talk about Spire's roadmap for data sets, but it enables us to bring in our other work as well. So Spire is not just an AIS data firm with the satellites. We also have, aircraft tracking, we have custom payloads, and we have raw weather data collection as well, which we'll touch on in just a second. And then predictive AIS. There's a massive amount of investment into the global supply chain industry right now. A lot of it's coming from firms that are looking to really improve the transparency of global flows of cargo and really help organizations understand, where their cargo is, what risks do they have in inventory, et cetera, and really kind of improving that overall visibility. And for that, we consider our role in that, making the data very easy to be consumed by machine learning algorithms that can look for those risks and look for those kind of highlights, And we also want to do a little bit of our own work in-house as well. So on our roadmap right now are predictors of where a ship is going to be. So to kind of cover the current and then the future state. And then we're actually able to bring in weather as well into that, and historical patterns as well, to really, really improve the confidence of where that ship's going to be. And then my favorite subject, data fusion, which is where you take AIS data and then you just add extra sets to make it more useful. So we kind of touched on this a little bit about the onboard processing and things like that. With a Smallsat approach, which is what Claude has, did a really good job for us kind of explaining, we can do a lot more hardware upgrades when we don't have these long cycles of many years to bring satellites up. We have the pipeline laid out to have satellites launching up to every 6 weeks if we need to. And our satellites are being built within months, not within years. And the benefit for that is we can continually improve the hardware that's on board. Now, that being said, they're obviously software-driven devices as well, so we can constantly upgrade the software as we can push, kind of the boundaries more and more of what the hardware can do. And then we made it kind of a must-do for us to own our own ground station network and operate it. And we have currently one of the largest low Earth orbit ground station networks. And they're not very exciting. I think they sound exciting when you talk about them, but literally they're satellite dishes out there just collecting downlink information. But again, it's part of our network and we're responsible for it, and that makes a big difference when it comes to the improving the data set. So data fusion, we're going to spend a fair amount of time on this as we roll through the presentation here. So, good example, this was just in the news just recently, Global Fishing Watch, talking about improving the visibility into illegal fishing and things like that. There's a great example of AIS data coming from multiple sources, so terrestrial, satellite, and then combining it with VMS data and actually, really helping, demonstrate the issue with illegal fishing and overfishing and things like that. It's a really, really good example of a fusion, fusing those two data sets together, and something that we really enable at Spire by just focusing on delivering high quality, very easy to work with AIS data. Going a little bit more on the technical side, there's clients out there that are fusing real-time imagery over the top of AIS and kind of giving the ability to, literally review satellite images of areas of interest and combine it with AIS data. Again, another good example. Okay, so I'm going to pause there because that was a lot of slides and a lot of content, and I did want to show a few more examples back on the live demo. And I'm actually going to tackle on one of these live demos. One of the questions that we get an awful lot is, what about ships that don't use AIS or have chosen to turn it off? This is probably, one of the #1 questions we get about, is there a solution for that and things like that. So I'm going to send the presentation back over to the demo machine, and it's going to come back up with, the same view we were just looking at, and kind of help, highlight the issue. So all the ships you see on this screen right here are obviously transmitting AIS data. So let's go take a look at maybe a solution for ones that aren't. So I'm going to switch over into an Esri product. So again, just to highlight, the ease of that you can consume the data. And I'm going to run you through kind of a use case here. So I'm looking at, a coast just off the coast of the Philippines Islands here, and I am interested in kind of understanding, what's happening in this area here. So within the tool here, I'm just going to literally draw a quick polygon, and I'm going to say, okay, show me ships that are in that area there. And the software is going to go out, it's going to call the data, and then the ships are going to come back and show up in the window here. He says, hopefully, live demo, remember? Oh, there they are. And, you can click on those and kind of query the information and work with it within the Esri, environment here. But what I wanted to highlight in this one is the ships that came back are obviously based on calling our API and saying, okay, show me the ships that are in this geo environment here. And well, what's really interesting is if I go ahead and then turn on, a kind of dialed in, SAR radar detection of vessels that don't have AIS. So for example, if you click on this little thing here, we've got you know, a SAR radar image showing what has been identified as a vessel and has a confidence of 100, you know, 100% that this is a vessel, and actually has its latitude and longitude, length and width and heading. And this is kind of showing, you know, there's no AIS signal for that ship, but it has been detected by an overlaid SAR, you know, satellite pass. Combine those data sets, so fuse those data sets together, and then you've got much more of a, you know, a situational awareness product. Okay, so another example of you know, fusing information together, zipping over to a slightly different viewer here. So this actually is a use case that came to us, and you know, makes a lot of sense. This is, you know, shipping off the coast of Houston here. You can see Galveston in the middle of the map here. And again, this is just built to detect ships that are potentially slowing down and may drop an anchor over you know, undersea pipelines. So the black lines you see kind of indicated on the maps here are actually you know, undersea pipelines that could be disrupted by, you know, a large ship kind of, you know, dragging an anchor across from it. So again, just a great example of taking AIS data and fusing it with you know, other data sources to make it, you know, a lot more interesting. So, okay. So bringing it back over to the other screen real quick. I actually, here we go. Okay, we're back on the live demo screen. So I'm actually going to take this point here to, you know, open up the line, the Q&A line, to kind of go through some of the questions. We did really well on time. We wanted to be conscious of everybody and getting finished on time and making sure we had time to run through the content. So Claude, if you don't mind coming back online. We do have a question about one of your slides that we wanted to tackle. It was talking about situational awareness has a 47% compound annual growth rate, but in the graph it was only a tiny part. So you're welcome to show that slide again if you want, or you can just talk to it if you want.
Yeah, I can show you that slide.
Okay, I'll send it over to you, no problem.
Okay. So. So I believe this is the one that was in question. 47% market value. Here we're talking about launch and manufacturing. So that means basically for the launch rate, that's about 18%, but the market value of manufacturing and launching this is growing quite fast actually, and it probably has something to do with the value on a per satellite basis. So launch themselves, of course, as we've mentioned, and as you can see from Spire, they launch in constellations, so that actually brings down the cost per satellite of launching many platforms at the same time. But when you talk about the market, there's more satellites to build, and as we saw, and I believe in this graph we see it, is that SA, which is this part here, it still is about the same level throughout, but then it starts from a very small base. And that compound annual growth rate starting in, let's say, I think it's 2016, correct, is very small here, but then it grows very nicely and it's stable throughout the whole forecast period in terms of launches. And then if we look here again in 2016, it's almost absent. I think Spire is right here, I believe. And so, and that grows also very nicely throughout the forecast period. And it is quite stable towards the end there. That's the main explanation for this 47% market value compound annual growth rate.
Great, thanks for that. And moving on to another question, I think I'm going to probably take this one. The question came in: can you tell what kind of cargo it is carrying? So I believe that's a reference to showing the first visualization that had the cargo ships of the global view. So great question. Obviously, AIS data gives you a classification of what the ship may be, but it doesn't actually tell you what's on board. So you actually have brought up a really good fusion use case, and how Spire solves that is we have agreements with a few firms that actually have very, very, very useful data sets that they collect that provide information on what's actually inside a vessel. You know, it's literally on what type of cargo. And there is a massive amount of interest, especially in that area I talked about earlier, the kind of global supply chain disruption, in figuring out exactly what's inside each container that's on each cargo ship as well. So AIS data doesn't provide that, but you can fuse those data sets together quite easily. On the ones that are kind of carrying things like unrefined crude, etc., there's actually a lot of inspection that's taken place on the tankers, and actually that data is available as well. So hopefully that answers the question. So I'll answer the question about AIS and ADS-B, and that may be based on a comment that I mentioned about how ADS-B is an example of a newer kind of global tracking system that's been developed, and AIS has obviously been around a lot longer, and then there may be more of a similar development in the future. I think that's why that question came up. And then from a fusion point of view, obviously most global trade is by ship. I think it's up to 90%, or it's about 90%. But there is still that little part that comes in, either by direct or by aircraft. So we are looking at tracking ADS-B and bringing that into that as well. Someone else answered a great question about the delay between detection by the satellite and availability with the API. That is an excellent question, and the answer is it depends. And I know that's not a great answer to give, but there is a lot of factors that will obviously impact that. It can be extremely fast within 5 to 10 minutes, or it can be a little bit longer. But actually, the reason I like that question is it brings up an area of focus for Spire, which has been, one, always make sure we're prioritizing the most recent positional update, so we can, rather than saying, these are all the messages that we've received, let's go chase the one that's most recent and bring that down. And it also helps us lean a little bit more on some of that predictive work we were talking about, which was, if there has been a gap in detection because of some reasons, either interference or disruption in the AIS signal, let's fill those gaps using machine learning and things like that. So it's a good question. This one, Mike, this is a good question actually, and I know we have another person from NSR on the phone, Caroline, who's very familiar with the small sats as well. We have a question about minimize collision and interference risk of these development of these constellations. So I'm not sure, Claude, if you want to take that one, or Caroline, if you want to unmute and take that one.
Yeah, Caroline, if you would, please.
Yep, no problem.
Sure, that's an excellent question, and it's becoming much more relevant as we have more of these constellations being launched. I mean, the reality is that everyone operating in space wants to avoid collision and is taking steps to mitigate the risk of collision, carefully monitoring where their satellites are, as well as the proximity as those satellites are orbiting with other satellites that might be coming somewhat near. I mean, there are new systems that are in development to enhance the ability to be aware of other satellites or potentially debris. We have ground-based systems that are using radar to more accurately track what's going on in low Earth orbit, so that there can be a warning sent to both satellite operators should there be a risk of collision, and then there can be steps taken to slightly adjust where that satellite is so that you minimize that risk. I mean, this is related in part to what is on board the satellite. Does the satellite have a propulsion capability where it can more easily move slightly to avoid that risk, or are there other capabilities where potentially using the solar panels to slightly shift where the satellite is can help, even if there's not an onboard propulsion system. So as of yet, there's still a lot of conversation ongoing as to how to best manage that. From a regulatory perspective, we see a lot of activity specifically in the US as to what's going on with space traffic management. A few additional steps yesterday taken on that, but the companies themselves are very cautious to not cause some sort of event that will ultimately threaten their own business if there's an anomaly in Earth orbit.
And just to complement that, we're seeing now satellites that were launched in the 1990s coming back down to Earth, in particular Iridium, and that was as part of a planned deorbiting program that they have. So there are examples out there of how things were actually planned many years ago, with regards to that, but it's interesting to see that there's also new plans that are coming up with regards to specifically address those issues.
Great. Thank you both for that great answer. Oh, okay, we've had a couple of follow-up questions come in, and again, these are mainly directed at me, I believe. Someone asked a good question about the delay from low Earth orbit is less than 2 milliseconds, so why does it take a few minutes? That's a great question, and obviously our satellites have to pass over a ground station to download the data, so there's where the delays come into it. Someone asked a really good question about bunker vessels as well, which I believe they're probably leaning towards the ships that refuel other ships. Traditionally, they don't seem to use any kind of tracking system. It's actually a good one. I'm gonna punt that one to follow up with you later on, because I actually don't have a good answer for that right now. We also had a question about relationships with commercial imaging community, and do you offer, or do you or someone offer fused imagery AIS products? And the answer is yes. Follow up with us. We absolutely do maintain those relationships, especially on the SAR side as well as the real-time satellite imagery side as well. Okay. So I actually believe there were a couple more questions that I'll take offline and follow up, because they're probably best answered by somebody else. And I think we can go ahead and probably close up. And Claude, if you had anything else to add, but we can go and wrap this up a few minutes early for everybody, and everyone get back to their day. And thank everyone for their time.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.